Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. Although just one guy for this week, Mike is still busy, but we are in a countdown as far as we are a little less than 3 weeks away from the debut of the new Superman movie to kick off the DCU. And with that being the case, I thought this week we'd take an opportunity to go through and talk all things the Man of Steel. So the next three videos we do this week, probably posting, next couple days. We're going to talk about what we believe the greatest Superman story of all time is right here is on the channel. Talk about why we think Superman is the greatest superhero in the DC universe. And then we'll also go through our thoughts on the previous silver screen imaginations of Superman that we have had. But today, since we are called Two Guys and a Stack of Comics, with comics being the main emphasis, I want to talk about what I believe the greatest Superman story of all time is. And while there are some great ones, all-Star Superman's a fantastic story. Superman for All Seasons is a fantastic story. Pick one that's a little outside of the box. Now, it is really well known and it's been adapted before, but I think from a story standpoint, to me, the story that best symbolizes why Superman is the greatest superhero is Superman 75 and the subsequent issues before that, The Death of Superman. And I believe that that story captures everything about why Superman is the greatest character in all of comics. I say greatest, he's not my favorite. My favorite is Batman. But I believe Superman 75 symbolizes everything that's fantastic about Superman. So I thought, let's just talk about it. Let's talk about why I think that story is great, capture it, go through everything. And so the first thing about this story is when you hear a death of story nowadays in comic books, it comes across as a lazy sales gimmick. And to be honest, there's a lot of people who say that's exactly what happened with Superman 75 as well. There's a lot of talk about the origination point of this series. Originally, there was supposed to be a wedding between Lois and Clark to mirror the TV series at the time with Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher. And that got delayed. And so then I guess the idea just got pitched around of, hey, why don't we kill Superman? And so at the time they decided to execute this, this was absolutely seen as a sales gimmick, with some of the writers feeling like Superman had been taken for granted. His sales were declining. They wanted to show an epic event that absolutely captured why Superman mattered. And to me, this is why this story is a 100% success, because the motivation behind telling this, while yes, you can say it was a sales gimmick, was to show what made Superman great. And I think without question, this story does that better than any other story featuring Superman, at least in my opinion. Now, the other thing with this is death in comic books used to actually mean something. About 30 years ago, we didn't have all these death of storylines the way that we do today. Some of that is this story can be blamed for it. But if you look back at the history of comic books, the majority of the major deaths that happened were actually pretty much permanent. Characters like the Waynes, Ben Parker, Gwen Stacy, Bucky Barnes, Jason Todd had all died. And while some of them have been revived lately, back then those were seen as really the only permanent deaths. And deaths of heroes were typically reserved for huge moments that had huge consequences that lasted. Walt Barry Allen's death in Crisis on Infinite Earths is one of the most classic and impactful deaths of any character. Same for Captain Marvel over at Marvel Comics in that epic graphic novel that came out. But for the most part now, death of series feel kind of cheap and lazy. Best encapsulated by the current Death of Silver Surfer event, which is a tie-in to a movie that doesn't even feature the version of Doran Rad, told by a creative team who's never really done anything with the character before, with events that don't even seem worthy of the character whatsoever. And that's been the case with the majority of death of comic books. The death of Wolverine felt like a cheap sales gimmick because it was. And while that might have been the motivation behind this one, the events behind those series didn't really capture what made the character great. Literally just an event where it's like, really? That's what got Logan? Even runs that I've liked, like Moon Knight recently, that did the death of Moon Knight in it, which I love the Jet McKay series, but the death of Moon Knight just felt weird. It didn't feel worthy of the character of Mark Spector. And that to me is where Superman 75 is different and where the death of Superman is different because it absolutely captures an event that is worthy of Superman and describes everything about the character that makes him the definitive character of DC Comics. So when you think Superman, I think the most important thing is what makes the character great. And to me, one of the things is, and we'll talk about this in a video later this week about why we believe he is the greatest superhero. Both Mike and I will talk about that. But one of the things is, Superman, for me, the main thing that's always kind of shown him to be is he's an aspirational character. Superman is the ultimate defender of good. The guy that you look at and he's gonna do the right thing. No motivation behind it other than the right thing to do is the right thing to do. In all honesty, that aspirational kind of old-timey feel is what makes Superman a classic character. Makes him a character that you want to be more like instead of having him be more like you. And I think the thing with Superman and the death of Superman is it fully showed that in action for Superman. And if you go back to that event, if you go back to 92 and 93 when this story comes out and they create Doomsday for this event, the great thing is, it was a time that we saw Superman able to fully use all of his abilities. Because most of the time in any Superman battle, has to be restrained. He has all of these powers, but there's very few enemies that he can ever unleash any of them on because it's just not necessary for him. And that's been a huge struggle with Superman. Is typically they're not able to create villains that are worthy of the character. So Doomsday is a villain who's actually worthy of Superman, an unstoppable, unbreakable, unbelievably strong opponent who requires every one of the Man of Steel's skills. Now, Doomsday is not the most complex character in terms of the Joker or Mr. Freeze or other characters who have depth, even a character like Bane from the Batman universe. Doomsday is not a character that had a ton of depth, but in a lot of ways, it still was a great exposure for why Superman was the one to stop this. And that ultimately what Superman is he is the ultimate defender of DC Comics. He is the last line of defense. Now, it stinks for me as a Batman fan to say that, but I think Batman's the ultimate strategist, right? Batman, that's his key skill set. But Superman is the one at the end of the day, if the DC universe is in absolute peril and there's one man to stop it, you're going to pick Superman. And this story showed that perfectly because unlike most Death of comics, it created an event that was epic that felt worthy of Superman. So if you go through the buildup of this story, what was so great is they kind of showed why Doomsday was needed to be stopped by Superman. And they did this by having him just wreck the rest of the DC universe. Now, for story reasons at the time, Wonder Woman, I believe, was in space at the time, and Batman was dealing with the whole Sword of Azrael event. And so sadly, the two major hitters are not in this book. I think that's one thing that some of the adaptations film-wise have done really well. But overall, you have the entire Justice League goes after Doomsday, what was the Justice League at that time. And Doomsday just wipes the floor with them. There's no one who can give him a match whatsoever. And I think what was so cool about that is it kind of showed that, sometimes you take for granted all the abilities that Superman has. You kind of just boil him down to the cheesy Blue Boy Scout. And again, that's a great character. But it also showed that, like, we take for granted how strong Superman is in these stories. And so I thought by having Doomsday just wreck almost every other member of the Justice League, it was a bold decision, but one that I think creatively adds so much weight to this because you're seeing all of these heroes who normally figure a way to win the fight show they are absolutely outclassed and have no ability to win the fight whatsoever. So to me, it all boils down to the final issue, Superman 75. And I think this shows everything great about Superman in a single comic. And it shows everything great about comics in a single comic. So one of the cool things is the narrative device of Superman 75 that they use is every single page in this was essentially almost a splash page, one panel. And the way that they drew the pages, the event, they made it was this seismic clash of the Titans. There's so many cool panels in the story. But one of my favorites is there's one where they show Superman and Doomsday punching each other, and just the force of the wind from the punches is shattering glass all around. And you see in this moment that the DC universe is at its darkest brink. This character, Doomsday, there is no one who's going to stop him. And there's only one man in his way, and it's Superman. And I thought what was so cool about this is it, one, showed the strength of Superman and how much he's always holding back. But it also, in my opinion, really showed the humanity of Superman well in this. And this is where I think Dan Jurgens did such a great job with it. And that one of the best moments of this comic book is at the end when this fight has gotten brutal. Superman is torn up, he's tattered, he's bleeding, he's got bruises, and he knows it's the end. There's a fantastic moment where Superman goes and he finds Lois Lane. He gives Lois a final kiss because he knows that's it. And then he charges back into battle to save the day. To me, that's as epic a moment as you're going to get in comic books. It was where you could just tell the writer was delivering something worthy of the character. This unstoppable foe. And the Man of Steel knows the end, and then he still runs it just to stop it. The way the fight scenes are choreographed in this comic, it's absolutely incredible. And I think this is something we don't do well in comic books anymore, is that I'll even bring up a comic I like Ultimate Black Panther. There was a year of storytelling designed around this clash between Black Panther and Moon Knight, and then the actual fight was 3 or 4 pages. This comic is no holds barred, incredible action, but it's also telling so much about Superman and that he knows he's going to die in this fight with no hesitation whatsoever. He goes on and takes on this foe and puts his life on the line. That to me is epic storytelling that belongs for a death of a superhero. Because it wasn't some manufactured weird thing where it's like, why did Superman not win this fight? There was subsequent stories before this that told why this was a threat worthy of Superman. They were willing to put other characters up against Doomsday to show like they don't have a chance. It's only Superman. And I think the great thing that it captured this, it showed all the world reacting to Superman, right? They show this great panel of his parents watching and just so concerned about what's going to happen to him. Even see some of his like foes looking and like wondering, man, well, how is Superman going to do this and showing concern for it. And I think what this did so well about this is it just showed why Superman is the superhero that everyone else is compared to. This was the sacrificial death of the DC's strongest superhero. And they showed his humanity by showing all of his connections to his parents, the love that he had for Lois Lane, that giving him that final oomph that just attaches him to humanity enough and makes you relate. Because I think all of us, you have that person, whether it's your wife or your kids or your parents or your siblings, you always have that one person that kind of gets you through whatever the tough challenge that you have. And that brief moment with him and Lois is so powerful because it shows that Superman needed that last little push. That gives him the strength he needs to finish the fight. Ultimately, why I think this comic works so well and why I think it's the greatest Superman story ever told is it shows that Superman's ultimate goal is he's going to save life no matter what the cost. And I think the thing is sometimes we reduce Superman to this hokey kind of cheesy blue boy scout, but the thing about him that is always so admirable and where I've loved this comic book ever since I read it when I was 4 or 5 years old and subsequently reading it so many times as I've gotten older is that it did show such a powerful message that laying down your life for other people is worth it. And if you have the ability to save others, then that's what you're called to do. And I think that's all we're looking for out of superheroes. What we want out of these superheroes is we want them to show morals and to show courage and to show different things that when you read them, it impacts you. And I always remember reading this as a kid and thinking, like, wow, like if Superman hadn't stopped this guy, he would have killed everybody. And that Superman gave his life to make sure that didn't happen. And that's a powerful message that I don't think we get anymore with the death of for characters. They now are done for shock value or a way to spice up sales with the intent to bring it back. And yeah, that was the goal here. But the cool thing is, if you read this story and you watch it, you really get like, dang, man, Superman saved the whole universe and he gave his life to do it and he didn't even hesitate. That's really powerful things because it's simple, but it shows so much about Superman and who we should want to be as people. And that's what I think comics used to do so well, is they used to give us an ideal to strive towards. They used to give us a role model to look up to. And yeah, a comic book superhero shouldn't compete with real life role models like your parents or, inspirational figures that really exist. But when they're done well, when they are done as they should be, to present aspirational characters making unimaginable sacrifices to show how we should live our lives, they deliver. And while death has become the cheapest and most sales gimmicky thing that exists in comics, the death of Superman is one time that I think it got it right because it showed the strength of the Man of Steel, the sacrifice of the Man of Steel, the humanity of the Man of Steel, and the ultimate thing that Superman was the ultimate champion of the DC universe, where when everyone else failed and everything else failed, he was the one who would save the day. And I don't think there's a better Superman story that can tell all of that other than the death of Superman. So, no offense to any other great ones. There are certainly a lot of great ones out there. All Star Superman being a personal favorite of mine, even though that's basically what everyone says. I think Death of Superman takes the cake as the top Superman story of all time that I think shows everything great about the Man of Steel. But I'd be interested to see what do you guys think down below. What is the greatest Superman story in your opinion? Again, completely feel free to disagree with mine, just one man's opinion. Always enjoy seeing your guys' comments down below. Thanks as always for watching, folks. God bless you. We'll catch you the rest of the week with some more Superman content.